I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. As always, please, again, we invite you to check out imixwhatilike.org and subscribe there to make sure you don't miss any of the multimedia work I and my colleagues do beyond these live streams. And of course, at social media, at I Mix What I Like for all of your relevant social media. Please like, follow, subscribe there. And please also consider becoming a member to this channel. As always want to continue to remind, it is not for any individual enrichment, whatever the numbers may be. It is about building some sort of collective, and or if that doesn't work out, we'll just ship all of whatever we collect to the work surrounding political prisoners, whether we support Freedom Archives, .org or Prison Radio or the JerichoMovement.com or the Abolitionist Law Center or Jailhouse Lawyers, all of whom we're endeavoring and building and arranging some interviews with as well. We'll distribute it that way, or you can just send money to political prisoner work on your own. Same thing with those who've been asking. I appreciate it about the myth and propaganda of Black buying power, and it's being available for free still digitally at imixwhatilike.org. Whatever arrangement I made with the publisher, I wasn't going to make a lot of money anyway, and I certainly don't lose anything by you getting the free copy, so please do grab it. And if you feel a certain way, I don't need you to send me anything. Please, again, contribute to somebody doing work on behalf of political prisoners or some sort of alternative, underground, radical something. But again, I appreciate all of that as well. Anyway, with that, by the way, a lot of stuff coming up at imixwhatilike.org in terms of including with these live streams. Dr. Gerald Horne is coming up. I don't even actually remember everything. Dr. Mark Blythe, who I think in his book Angrynomics has offered a practical solution that I think could be an organizing mechanism economically around my argument around redistributing the GDP. We'll talk to him about that and see if he agrees with what I'm suggesting. And in any event, I think it'll be a good discussion about economics. And then we have Dr. Karanja Carroll coming to talk about Assata Taught Me Beyond the Slogan. On the 15th, we're going to be commemorating Dr. King in the morning, first thing in the morning, 8 a.m. Eastern, with a reflection on Dr. King's posthumous assassination, or pre-assassination and posthumous assassination in the press and an image. Then, of course, later that morning, we have a return of the Hate Awards, which I cannot wait for, a satirical, comedic look at all that prevents revolution. It's going to be a lot of fun. The crew is coming back for that, so please come back. And then much more will be, please stick around. Anyway, forgive that delayed introduction or that prolonged introduction, but now we're going to bring up our next guest. Many of you, of course, know who he is. Longtime activist, organizer, speaker, radio host, television host. I'm talking, of course, about the on his way to legendary status, Eugene Puryear, who is a co-host, of course, nowadays with Breakthrough News, an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and author of the great book, Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America. So peace, Brother Eugene. Welcome back to the program. It's good to see you again.
Hey, peace, Brother Jed. I really appreciate you having me on. And I have to say, the return of the Hate Awards,
yeah, man.
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time coming. We are long overdue, but it has been, it's just difficult, getting everybody's schedule together. Mm-hmm. And when you work with these, not everybody wants to be on camera. So when you work with these, as I call them, 00 Africans, they like to do their work off, they do great work. They just like to do it off camera. As
Dr. Keto Swan, formerly of Howard University, now of UMass Boston, once told me, don't COINTELPRO yourself.
That's it. Don't COINTELPRO yourself. But so anyway, so it's important that we have 00 Africans. It's just that it's hard to do public work with them. That's all. It's just hard to get them on. So listen, I wanted to talk with you always about a lot of things, and I really appreciate the work you all are doing at both with the PSL and at Breakthrough News. And if folks aren't signed up to either place, you must, if you want to have really any hope of understanding what's going on in the world. But I did want to ask you, I've been thinking a lot, as I do a lot, all the time we're confronted with it, but especially again after something like what happens at the Capitol the other day. The first reaction I end up having is that there is another opportunity for what I consider to be an illegitimate punditry, political spokesperson class to reaffirm themselves as righteous in the face of something, so much more abhorrent. And then it comes up again. Well, what does it mean to be, we hear all the terms, liberal and left and progressive. And I'm, and it's almost never the concepts of the people that I'm thinking of when that's brought up. But I think it does filter down to a lot of people even trying to do good work and causes a lot of confusion. So I thought you'd be a great person to ask this question about how you approach a definition of what is left and how you would encourage any and all of us to approach that concept.
Well, I really appreciate the question. I think it's obviously, one of the most critical questions, and a lot of arguments amongst the left, right, are about what does that even mean? I mean, I think for people who are maybe wondering where does this even originally come from, which maybe speaks to its utility or lack thereof these days, it comes from the French Revolution. And just prior to the French Revolution, the parliamentary system they had there called the Estates General, all it really means is people who tended to be opposed to the king sat on the left, and the people who tend to be for the king sat on the right. And amongst those who were on the left were many of the major leaders of the Jacobin Club and others who would then lead the revolution. So sort of historically, the term quote unquote left has meant to some degree in favor of the popular masses, in favor of popular programs. But it's really, quite frankly, so amorphous that I think what has really happened now is it has encompassed almost anybody who has even the slightest critique of capitalism. Basically, if you're willing to say everything isn't all good with capitalism and the system should be tweaked. So then you've got everything from people who are, hardcore Marxists, people who are anarchists, people who are Pan-African and bringing different socialist and communist ideologies into that, who, I would consider to be unambiguously left. But then you have this weird space in America, because since unlike in Europe, you have social democratic parties that have a socialist history, although a very kind of reformist, bourgeois, pro-capitalist practice, but they have this lineage that goes back to the 1800s, Marxism. It makes some sense, and there's distinct from liberals. In America, you've never had that. So you have this weird space of Elizabeth Warren type people who have some kind of what would be traditionally called social democratic rhetoric, which is sort of reformist socialism, and then liberalism, which is pro-capitalist. So I say all that just to say it's become so amorphous, I'm almost unclear what left means. And so, the way I always approached it, quite frankly, is I take a more ecumenical attitude. Okay, fine. Since we're going all the way back to 1790 anyway, if you want to draw your lineage to the Montagnards and the Jacobin Club, fine, do your thing. I mean, it's under that umbrella. And I honestly think that this is a moment when we talk about left infighting and whatever, when you're typing on the internet or doing different things, I think it has a lot of usage as a shorthand. But I think really we're not going to get anywhere by saying, well, what is the left? I think we need to define for ourselves more distinctly what are the different ideologies in that space and where do we identify? What is Marxism? What is Marxism-Leninism? Are you in that space? Are you an anarchist? Do you believe in, in crematoreism? And I'm just listing sort of well-known anti-capitalist, pro-socialist, pro-communist ideologies, or do you identify more as a social democrat, quote unquote, and that long history and that legacy of believing capitalism is wrong, but you believe that sort of a capitalist democratic system can take us to the promised land? Or are you really a liberal, which is not even necessarily a bad thing per se? I think you've got a long way to go, but you basically think that capitalism is good, but just needs a few different tweaks. And I think what's crucial really is that we drill down on that level, because I think the history of left and how it's been used is so amorphous that it can encompass so many different people and kind of legitimately encompass different people that we lose so much by trying to say, well, who's the real left and who's the fake left? What we really should say is, what are the different components of people who call themselves left, whatever we may think of them, and where do we fit ourselves vis-a-vis those components? And then what political program conforms to that particular viewpoint? And how does that mean we move forward in general, and how we act with other people who are on the so-called left?
I appreciate that. And by no means do I mean this to be a sort of to be a gotcha thing. I don't want to ever try to do that. But as you were talking, I was reminded of this moment when during the elections you were kind enough to have me on Breakthrough to ask my thoughts. And I remember I said something to you, and I can't remember everybody who was on at the time, but I said something like somewhere in my response, I felt like I was just grasping for some hope, and I was saying I would like to see something going forward, like where electorally at least there is some unified effort between like the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Green Party, for instance. And if I remember correctly, you and a couple other people had a little face. There was like a little bit of like, oh my God, like as a third rail. It's like, and I know that there are like, and I get that there's all kinds of stuff going on historically and within pockets and all that. But as I was, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because I keep thinking in this moment, I would like to find a way. So I was going to even ask, how does the PSL do it? So that's sort of the where I think this question started forming. Like, how does the PSL separate itself and draw bright lines to say, we can't go any farther centrist. You know what I mean? Like we'll do as much as we can to build, to build that big tent, so to speak. But whether, and it doesn't have to be specific to the Green Party, but whether it's the Green Party or some anarchist formation or some other electoral formation or some other kind of socialists, how do you all try to say, like, we're not moving on these core issues, and for us, this is, in terms of this conversation, this is what it means to be left or really progressive or really revolutionary or whatever?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think we try to take a unite all who can be united approach on the individual issues. I mean, I think that's part of the question as well is sort of what are we doing? And then vis-a-vis, how does that mean we relate to others? Like in a mass movement struggle, for instance, quite frankly, even a lot of people who consider themselves Democrats are, going to be in the right place. They're going to be willing to mobilize, going to be willing to push forward on a number of issues. So I think on some points like that, especially the least controversial ones around sort of lowest common denominator, workers' rights, whatever it may be, you could probably build a pretty broad coalition. But I think you can only do that under the right sort of understanding, right? Like if we're going to unite and say, okay, you were with Joe Biden, we were with Gloria LaRiva, but we both are for a fight for 15, and we're going to do this forward. We got to talk about that. And we got to just say from the rip, like, we know we're not coming 100% from the same background, from the same perspective, that some of this could come up in the context of what we're saying. And it could go different ways. I mean, I think the way we've always tried to approach it in the PSL is if we're in a good faith coalition with anyone, it's sort of like if we can say what we want to say, you can say what you want to say, because we're trying to be united around one issue. I think the elections is a little bit different. And because what are you trying to really accomplish? And I think from my point of view, our goal in the elections is to create and to plant a flag sort of explicitly for socialism, explicitly for communism, explicitly for transcending this current system, not because it's wrong to propose reforms or even very deep reforms or whatever it may be, but it's not a solution that's going to meet the scale of our problem. And if we're at a point where, from our point of view, sort of the anti-capitalist critiques of society have a limited purchase hold in the country. One of the main tasks, if not the main task, has to be to reach people educationally, ideologically, politically about, okay, hey, we can all be in the streets on a lot of issues. We are often in the streets in a way that it doesn't seem like there's much of a difference, but there are big differences in terms of what the solution may be. And an election is, which has many flaws, is one of the only places where sort of political programs can be seen alongside one another, and where one can look at what's on offer and sort of get some sense of the political spectrum from right to left. And thus we feel it has a unique opportunity for PSL to fly our own flag and not in every election, but certainly in presidential elections. And I'll come back to the every election, and I'll come back to the point about the Green Party, because I think it's a relevant point. I don't want to dodge it. Is that it's a unique opportunity we have. Like, we have many, many opportunities, and often do, to build broad fronts around issues, to bring together people, to struggle on things that hopefully through that struggle will come to some greater unity and greater understanding. And we've done that on many bases. Certainly, I mean, people who know our party from the anti-war movement on, we work with everybody from Ralph Nader to the Nation of Islam, to other socialist groups, to small churches, to Quakers, everybody in that context. But that in this every 4 years, it's a very unique opportunity that we have to say, okay, well, if capitalism is wrong and people are saying there should be socialism, what does that mean? Who are these people and what's going on? That being said, I do think that I mean, as you know, I was once the statehood Green Party candidate for at-large
That's
council
right. That's
in
right.
Washington, D.C. So, I mean, there are certainly many opportunities where we're looking for, if there's a unique opportunity to advance the movement through electoral unity, that can be a very important task. Not in every situation, but that in certain situations you can concretely feel like this is it. My own reflection is, I think that, in my view, I think it's very rare in a presidential election that's going to be the situation. I think given the realities and who can win and who can't, I believe that sort of outright communists do better by having an outright communist platform and trying to use this as an opportunity to reach people. But I think on local elections, state elections, and look, sometimes if something is unique, I mean, you look at the anti-racist upsurge that took place over the summer. Now, if there was a situation where somebody who was like, let's just say, one of these young people who burned down that Minneapolis police precinct was like, I'm gonna run for president, and had a great platform, was bringing people around them and was bringing this groundswell. I think even if they were a Democrat, you would have to ask a question of whether or not you should unite with that person to push forward. Like if they were pushing the agenda of burning down that police station on the political stage in a major way, then you got to ask yourself, okay, even if they're in a Democratic primary, can we advance the ball a little bit by pushing them, by supporting them, even if we'll have our critiques? And we had our critiques of Bernie Sanders. But we said, if you're a registered Democrat, might as well vote for Bernie Sanders rather than whoever else is out there, because the better he does, in a way, the better foundation we build to talk about socialism, to what it is, what it isn't, who it is, who it isn't, what it takes, what are the good parts, what are the bad parts. So you also have to look at what are the opportunities in an election. So maybe this is all over the place, but I take that to say that it really is ecumenical, I think, on our part, because you can't, to me, the biggest problem you have is when you take these categorical positions. We're only going to do this. We're only going to do that. We're never going to do this. We're never going to do that. Because I think our forces, people who are revolutionary, which I consider myself, are still so limited, even though we're a lot bigger than we were maybe 5 years ago. If we're not thinking about how we engage, whether in the streets or at the ballot box, with how do we build our forces most effectively in that moment, we're probably down the wrong path. And I think a lot of times that's what happens, is we get caught in this, what do we do every 4 years? People have their own little boxes, and we're not really thinking, how do we advance the ball? So just to say all that, I don't think it's impossible for there to be, Green Party, Moving for a People's Party, PSL. I mean, all those people, we work together on many other things and have over the years, and often profitably and well. So it's not that it's impossible. I think it just has to be rooted in our current moment, and seeing how we get, what does it take us from point A to point B in a way that is recognizable, that when it's over, we won't just all go our different ways, but it will be greater than the sum of its parts, and we will have done something, even bigger. So I don't know if that is an evasion, but that's maybe my
No, I don't think it is at all, especially since we didn't plan on it, and I just threw that out there, and it just came to my head. I mean, I don't really, I don't have I don't know what exactly to do. So I just wanted to hear what you thought. So same thing. You mentioned the Movement for a People's Party. What do you think? What are your initial thoughts of that? And for people who don't know, I've just been paying a little bit of attention just because I do watch the Jimmy Dore show. So I've been learning from that, Nick Branagh. And I even went to one of their events in Maryland a couple months ago just to support and see what it was like. And I haven't, just to get out of the house and to join a rally of sorts, which I hadn't done. And they were protesting outside of a Maryland state senator's house. So I was like, what better to do on a Sunday afternoon or whatever. Anyway, I was also just curious to see who they were and what they were all about. And it was, I don't know, but anyway, any thoughts on it?
I mean, I would probably look at it in two ways. I mean, I certainly don't think that it's some super negative thing. And then the folks I've met that are affiliated with it, many of them are people who I have positive feelings about. My own view is, I think that it is a third party in the United States, like a real third party. Their stated goal is really to build a third party that can challenge at the ballot box to actually win the elections. I think that history shows us that is very difficult to build, quite frankly. I mean, pretty much all third parties that have been significant in this country, the Republicans, which is the only one that's ever won an election, really, the populist movement, Ross Perot, I guess. I mean, the ones that have really done a lot. It's a split from one of the major parties, and it's usually deeply involved in the major splits of society. So what happened in the 1850s? I mean, obviously slavery was a huge issue. The Whig Party, which was the second major party at that time, in contradistinction to the Democrats, split in a bunch of different ways because they couldn't agree on a lot of things. They couldn't agree on slavery in and of itself. They couldn't agree on whether they were just against slavery or they were, anti-racist. So you had the Free Soil Party, you had the early Republicans, you had the Liberty Party, which was like the true abolitionist, Frederick Douglass and the like, and you had the Know-Nothings, famous Know-Nothings, that were also a part of it. So you have 5 or 6 legitimate political parties. The only thing that really unified the people who were non-Democrats is they felt slavery should not expand outside of the South. But that was enough to create a unity in 1860 to allow the Republicans to succeed. The populist movement, similar piece. You have the defeated elements of the Black community from the Reconstruction politics who form this alliance with these white farmers that are deeply in revolt. So 2 mass movements of millions of people who then recognize, well, we can't succeed if we don't have a political expression. We have to represent ourselves. And they formed a political party and they made some gains. And they were brutally destroyed, brutally crushed. It's a different story, but I just put that all out there to say that. I could go on and on, but the point I'm making is there is some sort of societal material reality in going on that's creating big splits in society, including in the ruling class political coalitions. And from my point of view, Movement for a People's Party isn't really hitting on that. I mean, I think it's raising an important issue, which is that progressively minded people are not well represented in the so-called progressive party, the Democrats. And it's recognizing, I think this is 100% true, that the Democrats are not really open to more sort of progressively minded people having a big influence. I mean, if you need any better sense of that, look at how they shut AOC out from the Energy Committee. You think that was the least they could do in a situation like that. But ultimately, it's still promoting what I view as a capitalist politics. And I hate to say it like that because I know people involved in the Movement for the People's Party who are definitely socialists, but it's still in this sort of sense that that somehow you can capitalize on anger with the Democrats being not good enough. And the reality is, if that was the case, we wouldn't be sitting here right now, because I think anger with the Democrats for not doing enough amongst many tens of millions of people who vote for them every time is very high. In fact, most Democrats I know, and historically, are never that. I mean, the first election I ever really paid attention to, Jared, and I'm not. I don't know if I'm dating myself or whatever. 2000 Democratic primary, Al Gore versus Bill Bradley. My parents were really supporting Bill Bradley. He was putting universal health care out there, the whole 9, and then he loses. And I was like thinking Ralph Nader was pretty cool. Like I'm in 9th grade. I'm thinking fuck Al Gore. Let's keep it moving. But they were like, nah, you got to go lesser 2 evils, blah, 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 breaking it down. And that's not to hate on my parents at all. But I guess I am. But it just shows how this is pretty consistent. What people don't feel, I think, is that there is any alternative. And for there to be an alternative, people have to feel like that the Democrats represent something that can't be bridged. Just like people felt the Whigs could not continue because they couldn't bridge the issue of slavery. The populists, it was like, well, they were going against monopoly capitalism, and the Republicans and the Democrats couldn't bridge those issues. And to me, I feel like we're in a very similar place. What's the real difference in politics right now? Do you want to let profit be more important than people, or do you say people is more important than profit? At the end of the day, should capitalism, which is based 100% on profit, be the central organizing aspect of our society? And I believe everything from climate change to income inequality to racism all basically can be looped back to that question. And that, to me, is the question that's in front of creating a new political force that can really challenge for power in a serious way, which means tens of millions of people, is, I think, to raise this critique of capitalism to a point where it's not just, I can be a socialist and be inside the Democrats. It's more than just the Democrats aren't good people, or they hate progressives or whatever. It's because the reality of America, Republicans can be as far right as they want to be, because no matter how far right you go, you're in tune with capital. On the left, you can be left and in tune with capital, but the further left you go, the more the problem becomes. And if you have a Democratic Party leadership that's 100% committed to capitalism, as Nancy Pelosi says, that they will only ever go but so far. So if you feel that capitalism is a block between what could be and a beautiful future and what is, the Democrats then become a block. And until large numbers of people realize that through their own struggles and different things like that probably happen outside of politics, I think you're more or less just kind of whistling past the graveyard. Now, You can say in retrospect, maybe 5 years from now, if there is a third party that has tens of millions of people, that movement for a People's Party maybe contributed to that consciousness. I have a broad enough historical view that I think even people who don't seem like they're on the right path are still making important contributions to the broader sort of ideological sphere that's helping people understand what's going on. But from my point of view, if it isn't really raising the contradiction around socialism and capitalism explicitly, it's going to have a very limited base, because then it's really sort of just like a grievance politics against Democrats. But people are not going to accept that because of the lesser of two evils phenomenon. And even though they hate the Democrats, if it feels like there's still something they can gain, that the Democrats are not a true bar or block on the ability to move towards the future, I think it's hard to convince people why they should go with that. So that's my take in general, and that's how I generally feel. That's why I feel the Green Party has not succeeded. Why others is that it's too within the concept of like a third party. We can just get on the ballot, and if we just say the right things, that has proven not to be correct. I think it has to be a more fundamental cleavage, and just like the Liberty Party. This is the final thing I'll say about this, which was tiny, infinitesimal. Really made no difference at all in a big way in the 1840s and the 1850s. I mean, it was like just abolitionists and their friends. Obviously, when you look at that collection, if you get about halfway through the Civil War, many of those people had become much more important. And Frederick Douglass, who did not vote for Lincoln in 1860, but voted for the Liberty Party, that's history that's been moved out. That's what he said. He's not voting for Lincoln, but I can't vote for Lincoln because he's not really with it. So I'm going to go and I'm going to vote for the Liberty Party. Obviously, he became one of the most major leaders in the country within 2 years, from the margins to the center. But it wasn't because they were, trying to find some way to, broadly unite people. It was because they were so clearly focused on the issue of abolition above all else, that once the war started and it became clear if it wasn't an abolitionist war, you couldn't win it. This what became the radical Republican critique, many, many millions more people thought, well, wait, maybe they're making some sense. And so I'm just saying that to say that I think there's so many factors outside of politics that have to happen for those kind of third-party challenges to be clear. And I think history kind of shows that there is a key element of that for this to exist, which has to be a strong ideological movement that is polarizing things correctly.
So I think this is a good time for me to put up this reminder, because there are two things. First of all, I have totally forgotten the point you just raised about Douglass. I'm about to make this a t-shirt and a banner and a bumper sticker.
Yes.
Douglass did not vote for Lincoln in 1860. And I feel like, and I don't want to be misinterpreted, because in these days and age, I'll be misinterpreted, but I feel like I want to smack somebody with that bumper sticker the next time they tell me I have to vote for the Democrat. And then they also tell me in the same breath, they quote the one line from Douglass that they've ever read or heard, that power concedes nothing without demand. And at the same breath will tell us we have to concede and vote for the lesser of two evils, and that I'm a traitor even. People were, in fact, I remember Michael Cord was on Roland Martin calling black people traitors if they didn't vote for Biden. Imagine that.
There's a lot of traitors.
Hey, treacherous.
Biden got treacherous. How did Biden get fewer votes in Detroit than Hillary Clinton? He got fewer votes in Philadelphia than Hillary Clinton. I mean, because
Obama drank that Flint water.
Right. I mean, it really is. There's no greater misconception, I think, in America than what black people really do politically and what we are said to do politically. Because as I pointed out on my show, outside of Georgia, just about every area that is a lot of black people, Biden did worse. I mean, like, it's really, I think every majority black county in North Carolina. I mean, anyway, go back and listen to the Punch Out and Breakthrough News right around the elections if you want. But it's stunning how he actually seemed to have done worse in the blackest areas. And yet, and still, the narrative is black people won the election. And so what is the basis of that narrative? To me, the basis of that narrative is the black bourgeoisie is trying to maintain a hold on politics, because it's more clear now from the abstention politically and the rise of black radical young people, I think, that these Kamala Harris, Jim Clyburn type people don't really represent what they claim to represent, and that their electoral mandates often rest on very small turnouts, and that even in areas where they're claiming they're bringing out all these voters, many people are not coming out to vote. And I think that is why this narrative has become so huge, and white liberals have promoted it because it makes them feel good, I guess, about Black Lives Matter to say, yeah, Black people, Democrats or whatever, but it just doesn't comport with the actual reality. And the actual reality is it was the suburban surge that made a difference for Joe Biden.
Oh, man, that is
majority white, majority place, and it is what it is. But it was not a huge surge of Black people outside of the state of Georgia that made the difference for Joe Biden. It just wasn't.
So, all right. So there were the two things that I wanted that you said. One was the Douglas didn't vote for Lincoln, and I just want to. I will continue. I will credit you for the memory, but I'm going to be running with this. And then the other thing you said,
intellectual property. So do your thing.
No. I like to give credit. Because it also it's also selfish because by association with you as a citation, I look smarter anyway. So, but no, check it out though, because the other thing you said was that, and this is something I've struggled with in terms of my own involvement with the Green Party and what I thought were radical engagements with electoral politics. And maybe I'm just finally, after what you just said here, realizing how wrong I was. But because I really think your point at least resonates. It's not the first time I've heard it, but is resonating differently. This point that you have to have an overtly anti-capitalist labeling and messaging in your work if you're going to pierce this third party bubble. Otherwise, you're participating in a fantasy. If I'm hearing you correctly, that people even unconsciously know is a fantasy, and that's why they can't get excited about it. Is that in part why you're saying, or is it just?
I don't know how many people know consciously. I think some of it is, but I do think that it's born more out of their very legitimate frustration.
But that's what I mean. When people, like when you're saying the Green Party hasn't taken hold, is it because unconsciously people who want an overt attack or aggressiveness against capitalism aren't getting that, and they're not being fed in what they know is or what maybe they feel unconsciously?
Well, I think it's two things. I mean, I think that yes, some people are like that, but I think some people don't have that kind of critique of capitalism. And I think that's sort of the Green Party is kind of riding two horses. I mean, when you look at Ralph Nader and others they're obviously not socialists, right? Like they're deep reform capitalists, vastly superior to anyone the Democrats are putting up, no doubt about that. I voted for Ralph Nader in 2004, so I'm not out here to hate, and thought he did a great job in 2000, quite frankly. But be that as it may, to my point of view, it's still trapped in sort of a middle class protest politic. I hate to be that blunt about it, but I will. People who are disaffected from the Democratic Party, who feel that things should be much more progressive, but who don't really have a class critique or sort of a rootedness in a capitalist understanding of change. And so it's sort of like a relationship of forces. Well, the Democrats are terrible. 75% of people say they're for universal health care. So there has to be some space to the left of the Democrats to where we could promote a party that could at least contend that is uncompromising for universal health care. But that's not how people engage in politics. Like most people who vote, I think they're doing it from a pragmatic perspective. I don't think most people who vote think they're going to change the world. I think they think that that's all that's really possible and all that can really be done. And thus, like, this is the best thing to do in this moment. And vis-a-vis other progressive policies, I think they feel, well, after the election, let's do movements. Let's do these other things that can change people's minds. And then next time we'll be able to have a more progressive platform. And I think that it really just disaggregates the reality that this is a capitalist system, that the state, the government to manage the collective affairs of capitalists. The two major parties are going to do anything possible to keep more anti-capitalist, pro-socialist rhetoric on the margins, not the mainstream, but that in and of itself is their Achilles heel because it speaks to their unwillingness to talk about solutions that meet the scale of the problem, and thus is what opens up the opportunity to really polarize things. But if you're never out there to say what the polarization is, how will things ever become polarized enough? And I think that is the real challenge, is that it's based on a thought process of how politics works that I don't think is really correct, and that I think is hoping for a space to be created outside of major cleavages inside of the system and rooting themselves in those major cleavages. Like, again, I hate to keep using the example, but like, there was very little that united the Republicans, other than they didn't want slavery to emerge out of the South. But that in and of itself was the major fault line of society, so you could unite tens of millions of people around it. I think the major fault line in society right now is capitalism versus socialism, or at least capitalism versus something else.
And not healthcare, not force the vote and all that other stuff.
Right. So we have to find a way to polarize around that. And to be fair, like, and again, there's like a historical perspective and like, I'm not going to be involved in that, but like, whatever. I think if there's like more people saying the Democrats are terrible, it's probably better than less people. And certainly it is probably helping raise these questions, but I don't think it's helping provide the answers for like what the next step is and how you in these relatively small numbers, even if we're talking low tens of thousands, like what do you individually and with your neighbors, friends, groups need to do so that we're not tens of thousands, but tens of millions? And I think that's not going to come through elections, and it's not going to come outside of a strong polarization, which means as many of us as possible need to be that pole when we get a chance where it makes sense. I mean, obviously, just running around, just waving the red book and the red flag randomly is not going to do anything for you. And groups who do that don't really grow. And I think you have to look for creative alliances and ways to work together and ways to bridge that gap with people who, hate capitalism, people who think it's okay, people who think it needs a little tweaks. Like, let's find ways to bring people together in a concrete way to go for the things that we really care about. But when it comes to the every 4 years presidential election in particular, I think we have to recognize what role does that play in our society, and thus what is the best utility we can get out of it, so that since our strategy, which goes beyond the election, when we're after the election, we feel like we've moved the ball forward a little bit more.
Man, there's so much. Okay. So there's one more thing I wanted to ask now that you've said what you've said on this, and then I want to kind of switch. And I think I've found a way to collapse my other questions because we're already at 40 minutes. This is crazy. Do you think, because I think not, and I'll just leave it there for the sake of time. I think not, but do you think that Bernie Sanders' presence and all of the I guess allusions to socialism was a net positive for promoting an actual socialist struggle?
I think all of his actions up until he capitulated this year, I would say it's a net positive. I would say jury's still kind of out in a way, because I don't know how people are going to react. In a way, I don't know what people expected from Bernie Sanders, since I don't know how they're going to react. I feel certainly his first campaign, more than anything else, just my own observations of promoting socialism, was a huge game changer. Just no doubt about it. Even, PSL, which is like, we're saying we're Marxist Leninists, we're supporting Cuba, we're saying peace with the North Korea, all these different things that are a little outside the mainstream. We saw a big increase in people coming around, and many people were telling us it was Bernie Sanders who opened it.
Hold up. I got to stop you there because that was kind of funny. You said a little bit outside the mainstream, support from North Korea and Cuba, just a little bit outside the mainstream. A little bit.
I think that's definitely true. That's very true. Just a little bit out.
Just a little bit.
A little bit outside the mainstream, to be fair, and I think this is an important way to talk to people, is what does it really mean to say, like, you support Cuba beyond, like, I think Cuba is great? Like, really what you're saying in America is, I think the blockade of Cuba should be ended, and that there should be free relations between the two, and we should have good relations with Cuba, which I think is actually not that controversial. And I think many people, Jeff Flake, the former Republican senator from Arizona, said that. Same thing with North Korea. What are you really saying in America when you're saying that the DPRK is unfairly maligned and marginalized? Is, let's have a peace treaty. Let's try to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. We got relations with Saudi Arabia. Why are we not over here dealing with North Korea? And I think part of how the system is so smart, and how it really confuses people on these international questions, is it makes the real dividing line, what do you think about this government? And quite frankly, there are many things we could say about both North Korea and Cuba. I think there are many positive things you could say, but there are a lot of things to debate, no doubt about that. But is that really the major issue? Or is the issue, what is the attitude we should be taking towards these nations? Should it be imperialist? Should we be trying to destroy them and crush them? Or should we be promoting peace and cooperation? And I think that's why I like to say a little bit outside the mainstream, because it's sort of like you're being pushed much further out than the actual policies would even in require. So just a way of flipping people's minds. I now forgotten your original question.
No, that was it. The original question was just was Sanders a net positive for the struggle?
So yeah, now I don't know, because I think the way he has dealt with Biden, I think, has been unprincipled. I think for him to say over the summer Biden could be the next FDR, just going so much further than you even really had to, I'm fearful that could also have a cynical impact on a lot of people. Damn, even Bernie Sanders is turning around on them, and that could be very bad. I can't say, I've seen most of the evidence I have seen is that people are like still engaged, but are, moving further left, quote unquote left, more towards revolution than reform. But again, that's just what I'm seeing. And even though I can say, as a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, I maybe have a more larger view than many others, it's still a very small number of people compared to the tens of millions who are contacting us, even the thousands and thousands who are, than the tens of millions who supported Bernie. So I am a little concerned about that in the long term, but I do think as of now, I would say it's been a net positive.
Fair enough. I'll defer to you because I haven't been out, advocating on the behalf of socialism. But I just, so we'll see. But yeah. Anyway, I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're right on this one. Anyway, so let me try to collapse this question in this kind of crazy way. And I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying. It's to suggest that I think these two men are the same or on the same team. But I'm just doing it for the sake of time and whatever. If there are two white men alive or dead that I think more Black and other people should be paying attention to and are being somewhat equally discouraged from paying attention to, one is Julian Assange and the other is Karl Marx. And so, again, I'm not saying they're on the same team. I'm not saying we're all friends. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying if I just think that what's happening to Julian Assange says, never mind the individual suffering he's going through, the torture and all of that, but what it speaks to for the rest of us, and including Black people and the, other oppressed, so-called minorities or racialized, colonized groups, it says a lot. I mean, because the first thing I think of, if they're going to do this to a white man that came, some kind of middle-class white man, then good Lord, for exposing war crimes and all that other stuff. And the other is Karl Marx, because the reason I bring it up is because I said off air that I finally got to see the young Karl Marx, which I had not seen as a film by Raoul Peck for a long time, which I thought was fantastic. And the first thing I thought of, again, admittedly, is why can't anybody from the African world get treated like this in a film? Like, can we get I have to admit, God damn it. This is such a good movie and nobody in Black history has been done this well in a film. Anyway. But the one point that came up specifically that I wanted to raise with you is that Karl Marx is often somewhat the way Assange, I'm trying to do this. Assange is dismissed as he's not a journalist. He's not an activist. He's not a radical. He's not, in some cases, he's not Black. He's not, so we shouldn't care. And Marx, the same way, is dismissed as either not Black, whatever, but also as just an erudite, ivory tower, But as the young Karl Marx highlights more than I can remember, he was not only was he exiled from country after country and targeted hate, he was impoverished. He was constantly an activist, getting hounded by the police. He was a journalist doing what I would consider emancipatory journalism. He was, he's doing all of these things that made him, much like Assange is today, a threat to the states and attacked by the world around. Anyway, so what do you think? I don't know. I don't really have one question. I just wanted to have you talk about both of them, and really because I know Breakthrough has covered Assange, and I don't see him getting covered a lot anywhere. And in some of the Black spaces, media spaces I go to, he's not discussed at all. And I'm thinking, my God, how could we not? So I just, do with whatever I've said that you will. But yeah.
No, I hear what you're saying 100%, and I think that there are parallels to draw. I mean, to start with Assange, I agree with you 100%. I mean, the lack of focus on this, I think people should be concerned about. I mean, if they succeed, basically even the most basic of journalistic things that were protected allegedly under the First Amendment will go away. And I think if people want to just give themselves a historical parallel here, I mean, there's just the fact, first and foremost, that WikiLeaks has ripped the veil off of empire and the corporate world in a way I'm not sure anyone has ever done before by releasing all these documents and being willing to do it. And that's why, the way major newspapers quote it now is they'll say as diplomatic cables show. But there's probably 20 stories every single day that use WikiLeaks as
another good point. That's all WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks
show.
And there's so many things we know. I mean, just the Vault 7 releases about CIA cyber weapons, the NSA spying, everything that's in there. I mean, you want to look at what U.S. imperialism is doing in Africa. Where is there a better resource of direct primary source documents than WikiLeaks? There isn't one, quite frankly. And you can see, all the different things of them pressuring different governments. Worth noting here that last year, even after Julian Assange was in prison, WikiLeaks broke a huge story in Namibia about how the fishing rights, which is the main industry outside of mining there, had been sold off by these corrupt officials to some major Icelandic multinational, shook the whole country, but it was an important issue for the people of Namibia. Namibia to reclaim their own national wealth. And so ultimately, the just that alone should speak to it. But I think, a historical parallel people should consider, especially people in the Black media space, is, what was the impact of the blacklisting of William Worthy? What was the impact of the destruction of Paul Robeson's Freedom newspaper? Was it better or was it worse to have anti-imperialist, in some cases pro-socialist media that was out there that was pushing against the grain of the mainstream media? I think it was worse. I think there's a reason why they tried to box that out. And I don't actually think it was primarily because they were Black, because there was other Black media. But the last thing they needed was William Worthy telling the truth to Black America about what was happening in the Korean War, which is what his dispatches were about. The last thing they needed was Lorraine Hansberry in Freedom newspaper talking about the Egyptian revolution and the need of Africa to be free and what's really going on in all these different countries, and saying what we need to do is unite. And that ultimately the idea of penetrating our society with more anti-imperialist consciousness, where people say this is an empire, what they're doing is wrong, and that there are other people who are also victimized by that, which means that there's a counterforce that can push back. That's the thing that's most dangerous to the state. I mean, the context of WikiLeaks when it came out played a huge role in driving opposition to the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, other wars that happened subsequently since then. I mean, obviously it played a big role in that, and that's good. And so I think if you just make a small historical parallel there, I think you can see the importance of standing up, for Assange in this situation because of what's happening. And I think the issue with Marx, I mean, this one is always very confusing to me. I mean, how many revolutionary Black people can give appreciations of Marx before we move off of this? I mean, certainly the point is made. You can make the point very directly. Amilcar Cabral, certainly Samora Michelle, W.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Claudia Jones, Marvel Cook, Vicky Garvin, Julia Mayfield,
Julia Mayfield, yeah.
There's so many I can't even remember them now.
No, I mean, I put some of them on. Assata Shakur. I put the Black Panther Party. The
Black Panther Party. I mean, there's so many. The League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Let's go back to one of my favorite debates of all time, the Kwame Ture.
The Asante debate.
The Asante debate, and the point that's being raised by Kwame Ture, which is about science. That even if you look, there are many things that can be said about Marx. But the reality is, and I think Kwame Ture laid this out correctly, as Marx said, I'm not a Marxist. In fact, all he said was, I'm trying to examine capitalist society and figure out what the universal laws that govern capitalism are. I think he did a fantastic job. I don't think anyone has done a better holistic job. And I think there's a lot that can be said about that. Now, there are other ways of appreciating him, whether people want to associate him 100% with their ideology. I mean, I mentioned Kwame Ture, obviously the All-African People's Revolutionary
Party. We're getting great ones in the chat. Maurice Bishop, Walter Rodney.
So many.
Yeah.
But even if you look at Nkrumah Tureism as an ideology, what did Nkrumah say about Marx? What did Sekou Touré say about Marx? They certainly weren't like, put the dude on the shelf. They were like, no, this is fundamental and what we must read. Amiri Baraka's autobiography, one of the things I always note about that is he states how he was pretty surprised when he went to, President of Tanzania. Nyerere, and he's got the collected works of Lenin. And he's thinking like, well, what's that for? And he's like, because we're trying to make a revolution out here. Like, you got to read the collected works of Lenin. So I think, there's sort of two pieces to it in my point of view. I mean, there's certainly an issue about sort of Marxism, Leninism. There are issues that people can make with sort of maybe philosophical epistemologically about whether or not Marxism is European or whatever it is. But I think the reality of it is this. Were the general scientific ideas about the motion of capitalism he put forth right or wrong? And is capitalism the wrong system, and is socialism the negation of capitalism? Yes or no? And if you agree, like I would agree that that is the case, then you have to have Marx at the center of what you're doing. I'm not saying it has to be the only thing. If you want to try to go beyond Marx, go all for it. That's what he was for. His idea was, it's method. It's science. It's what's really in society, not just something I'm making up in my own head. So if you got something else to offer it. That's not anti-Marxist. It's not antithetical to Marxism. This is what he was hoping, that people would build on his legacy and investigate the areas he never had a chance to investigate, like his famous letter to the Russian revolutionaries where they were saying, is it possible the traditional mir or village commune could be the basis for socialism, not like a mass workers movement in the way you put it out there? And he's writing back, you might be right. I don't know. I'm looking for it. And so ultimately, it's to me part of the most insidious element in American politics that has a direct result to the brutal suppression of the Black communist left in McCarthyism, that somehow Marxism is white and needs to be sort of just put in the same place as everyone else. I mean, to me, I couldn't think of a more dangerous view of, well, again, to raise Amiri Baraka, he makes this exact point when he said, well, all these people were critiquing me when I was moving to Marxism, saying I was moving towards a white ideology, but they were all following all these white health gurus and, Far Eastern yoga type people. So why am I wrong for reading Lenin and they're right for doing this? I think it really has nothing to do with Marx or with Lenin. It has to do, I think, with just anti-communism. And I think you have to look at it that way, but there's just too many Black revolutionaries who have used this as a key handbook, as their heart and soul text, as their base for expanding their own thought processes to even say that. I think it's so disrespectful to say Marx is white. Well, what did you say about Claudia Jones? Why did she want to be married next to him? Why did she remain a Marxist her whole life? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I think you think about all these people who it really is a slap in the face, I think, to them as Black people and Black revolutionaries, to make it seem like they were somehow duped by some white man, with a good rap or something like that, like when it's not what has happened. So it's an important question, but I think if you think capitalism is the problem and you want to learn how capitalism works, the reality is Capital Volume 1 is the text. I mean, there is no really sort of scientific basic text. There are many other things to be said about capitalism, many non-Marxist things, many people who are not Marxist, who we must read to understand what's going on in capitalism. But I don't see how you can say you understand how capitalism works and how to negate it if you haven't read Marx. That's just me.
And I definitely, I can't. Well, obviously, what can I say? The one thought I had was that, a lot of my African-centered friends will certainly not put down Gerald Massey if they want to understand the importance of Kemet to European civilization, and yet he was a white man himself. So I mean, I think anyway.
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, why is it that Sheikh Anta Diop in his unification of Black Africa, why are all his allusions to what they should be doing to the Soviet Union and China? Like, because obviously for him, the main reference point for Africa uniting and becoming strong vis-a-vis imperialism were the socialist anti-imperialist countries that had successfully challenged imperialism and successfully developed their continent and economy. Obviously not a Marxist, obviously someone who is critical of Marx, someone who certainly is at the heart of Afrocentrism. But when it came down to the practical reality of what we're doing, he was willing to give credit to the people.
Well, I also think he's, again, this is where for me, and I know we don't have time to get into this, but where I'm always frustrated by these debates is that sometimes the labels are incorrect and inappropriate. It's like genres in music. It's not always appropriate. So, because obviously Jupp was clearly concerned with, the cultural contribution of Africa and the value of understanding African culture and the unification of Africa through a common culture. As much as he was involved activist-wise as a student with Marxist organizations and understanding, a materialist analysis, as you point out in the book, that many African-centered folks don't pay attention to. Just as I often say, a lot of materialists don't pay attention to the breadth of African-centered thought. Molefi Asante is as much as they get. By the way, folks listening, if you missed it, the Molefi Asante Kwame Ture debate that's on C-SPAN is classic. You must see it. And
I found this sister online who was the chair. And I've got as like a point on my agenda, I want to reach out to her.
No, let's do it, because Kemet Shockley, my buddy, was the organizer of that event.
I mean, that to me has to be, you probably know more about it than me. I bet you that's a fascinating story about how that came together, University of Cincinnati, what brought together, how they brought them, who they talked to. I think that in and of itself must be an amazing story.
We're going to tell it here, because Kemet is going to come here and he's going to talk about that. And maybe I'll ask him to put us in touch. We'll get the sister that was involved too. If she's interested, but because Kemet and I have had this debate personally on a number of occasions. He sided with Asante and me with Ture, but he but anyway, we'll talk with him about the background of that. And it's a classic debate. Listen, man, it's easy to do an hour, and I really appreciate you doing it. And to those with many questions and comments, we didn't get, obviously we won't be able to get to all of them, but please continue the conversation. And just quickly, Eugene, any last words? And tell us definitely about Breakthrough News and what's coming up there, and anything else that we need to know about.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, I have continuing questions and comments. So this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, we talked about some of this before, and we'll be talking about it again.
Always. So, I keep bringing it back up with you every time. So, yeah.
I mean, that's the only way we're going to get somewhere, is to keep hitting our heads against each other until we get the right answer somehow, some way here. But yeah, I mean, we're at Breakthrough News. We're at BT Newsroom on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, at BT Newsroom. We're on YouTube, Breakthrough News as well. I don't remember if it's /Breakthrough News, but YouTube, Breakthrough News, we're there. I'm doing a daily podcast, The Punch Out, 15 minutes, real quick. You can get it. That's coming out on Spotify. It's also coming out on SoundCloud. We're doing a Thursday night show now, The Freedom Side, every Thursday at 8 p.m., where we're trying to tackle some of the same subjects. We were on last week, obviously, and we'll be on again this week. We've got labor segments. We got all this. It's not just me. Trust me, it's many other people. So we're trying to just do as much as we can. We're 100% crowdfunded. Would love people's support, questions, comments, criticism, whatever it may be. Because my own view on this entire thing is the media front is a critical front. The information front is a critical front. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you've been talking about, I learned about some of it from you from I Mix What I Like, the book. But, nevertheless, I just think that we're never going to succeed until we create, I think, a multiplicity. I don't think it's just going to be one network of independent, uncompromising media that is just doing whatever we can to get these alternative views and perspectives in front of people and give them an option.
Well, I appreciate that you all have done this, because I have finally, I'm completely off of commercial media, even for just like background basic news, or even just to make fun of. Like Jimmy Dore is my MSNBC. No disrespect to him, but that's the centrist for me. He hates on the Democrats, and that's good. But you and others that I try to link up with, I mean, you've made it possible. I don't have to turn on whatever, and I can get all of the news of the day. I can get coverage of the world. So it really is taking place. So I appreciate Breakthrough, and I got to catch up to the podcast, which I didn't know about till just now. So I'm late on that too. So anyway, Eugene Puryear, thank you very much, man. We'll have to catch you another time, but thanks again, man. Keep up the good work.
No, man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks again to Eugene. Thanks to all of you for joining me. I saw a lot of great comments. Thanks to those who have joined and shown their support today. We really appreciate that. And stay tuned, because we're going to shortly, I'm just waiting for my colleagues. We're going to, we have a meeting set up, I think this week. We're going to soon be announcing a new project. So the contributions aren't going to vain. And if that project doesn't work, we're just going to ship it off to some political prisoners or both anyway. So it may all be the same anyway. So I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Please come back tomorrow and go to imixwhatilike.org now and catch everything you might have missed. And consider becoming a member to the channel, and like, share, subscribe, and all of that. And as usual, like Fred Hampton used to say, to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. We'll catch you next time at I Mix What I Like Live. I mix what I like.